Cheers. Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I am Kyle Stone. My friends, thank you. My friends call me SOB. Liam Randall can't be with us today. He is preparing for the birth of his third child. He did, however, record a good bit of the slides, so I will be playing those later today after I'm finished speaking. The talk today is on the Internet of Things, vulnerabilities, botnets, and detections. We're going to be discussing how to build development kits for tiny embedded devices and vulnerabilities and low-hanging fruit in SCADA, ICS, and other types of embedded devices. So, today's agenda, what we're going to be talking about. The why, the devices we have chosen for the presentation, vulnerabilities, a quick demo that we may have perhaps lost all the time for already, defending against said types of attacks, and detection with Bro. And then at the end, if there's any time left, we'll take some questions. So, why are we presenting in this format? We decided that, well, defending kind of sucks. We're tired of vendors ignoring us. We're tired of poor patch cycles. So, to remediate these problems, we decided to release in tandem blue team and red team. So I'm going to be talking about the red team side. I'm going to be talking about a 6-net remote command execution that I discovered about a couple weeks before DerbyCon last year. In addition, I've got a Polycom here that has a undocumented serial port. Accessible from the rear of the device. You just flip it over and it's right there. In certain versions of the firmware, they did not disable the debugging, so you can perform local command execution as root. So, we're going to be talking a bit about CERT as well. CERT kind of has their hands tied as far as what they can do with a vendor and what their appropriate actions are dealing with vulnerability researchers. The first product up is the 6-net Linux-based MIPS IPM devices. I believe that there are more devices than just the IPM that is vulnerable to this attack in particular. But what makes them scary is the target market that they are trying to reach with these devices. We have power and utilities, oil and gas, transportation and maritime, cell tower and ATM remote management, video security, fleet management, and mining operations. These are all things that affect everyone in this room, everyone in the public. If someone was to launch a online attack against us, a very easy way to render a population ineffective is to crush their economy and to crush all of their utilities and the things surrounding them. You could very quickly immobilize someone by going after these. And to top it off, they OEM this device. So there's more out there. I haven't found them all. I don't know how many there are of this particular device. One that I did find is a Honeywell rebrand. It's the RC500. As you can see here in this slide taken from the document of operations, they literally took the 6-net configuration software and photoshopped it. Actually, photoshopped it quite poorly. If you look at the bottom there, where they tried to mask it out, you can see that it's a VT-IPM 1410, and that's in the official manual on their webpage. That's Honeywell. So the next vector we were looking at was the Polycom VVX 1500 device. It is a Linux-based ARM VoIP video phone. Does H.264, does SIP, SRTP, encrypted VoIP, etc. Where do you find these? You find them in offices, conference rooms, unsecured lobbies, controlled doors for controlled access. A lot of times you'll find them mounted on the wall outside of, say, a NOC or a security checkpoint that you need to go through. You also find them on manufacturing floors. You'll find them a lot of times where they've got them set up because some operator needs to call up to the front office and it's just hanging out on the floor, tied to a pole. So this particular vulnerability was patched over a year ago, but undisclosed by the vendor. They didn't tell anyone. It's not documented anywhere. How do you know to protect yourself if you don't know it's there? The vendors are doing a poor job communicating with us. So as you can see here, right on the back next to the power plug, right there is a 3.3 volt TTL serial. Yes, so I found the unauthenticated root Linux shell externally accessible. You literally can walk up to it with just any 3.3 volt adapter, plug into it, and you're in their debug shell. You can do all kinds of nasty stuff in this debug shell, from forcing phone calls to shutting the screen off, perhaps while a phone call is in progress. You can turn their voicemail indicators on and off. You could turn off and on the progress lights for the phone. So the disclosure timeline with 6net. This was rather an interesting situation that I found myself in. So the vulnerability was reported. ICS, if nobody's familiar with it, this is the Industrial Control System version of CERT. They have their own branch. They are part of the Department of Homeland Security. All they deal with is infrastructure. So these are the guys protecting the systems that protect our nukes, that protect our water, that protect our power. 6net claims that the vulnerability doesn't exist. They want a proof of concept. So I submit a UDP, TCP, and serial Metasploit module as a proof of concept. In the interim of waiting for the response from the vendor, I found more and more undocumented features. I found an integrity problem. You can manipulate files that you shouldn't be able to manipulate. And again, this is remote, local, TCP, and UDP. You can upload anything you want to it, exfiltrate anything you want out of it, and manipulate anything you want in the file system. It is writable. So, about a year later, I wind up with a CERT advisory and a full-blown CVE. This is not the whole story. TCP and serial for the 6net protocols were left off of the disclosure, as well as the Honeywell that I'd found that was reported initially. That was in the very first contact with ICS CERT. So, dealing with these types of networks and complex relationships. To be very fair, this is a very complicated space. These are mission critical systems that people do not want to take down. They don't want to let you pen test them. They don't want you to touch them. You can't run a VA against them. They don't want you on them. If this thing screws up, you might pour molten lava on someone. You know, you might shut down a city's power system. You might knock off the city's water grid. So as you can see, this is a very complex web that we are in here. Really? Apparently I suck at Keynote. Good Lord. Okay. See if we can get that back up. Really? So, we have industry groups that define the standards for the protocols and devices. We have the vendors. We have ICS CERT. We have the researchers, and we have you, the consumers, the guys who are supposed to be protecting this stuff. How do we protect it when the vendors don't tell us what's wrong? They don't even tell us that these things are Linux boxes, that we need to treat them as such. We have no idea. Quite often you will find that vendors are using Linux to lower their time to market and to use common tool sets that developers already know. It gives you a very easy way into the market and a very rapid way to be able to deploy a said device. I'm seeing this a lot more. It's not across the board, but it is coming more and more. And I think with the popularity of ARM system on a chip, we're going to see this more and more every day. So what do we do? What do we do when the vendor doesn't want to cooperate? Do we tell everyone in the world? Do we put people's lives at risk because these things touch physical things? You know, how do we approach this responsibly? I don't know the answers to these questions. If you do, come find me, talk to me about it. Let's discuss this. When you get into a situation where the vendors don't care, I find it really difficult to deal with them. A lot of times, what people are doing now, they're going through CERT to get a bit of anonymity and a bit of insurance so that the vendors aren't going to come after them. So, how do we disclose responsibly when it wasn't supposed to go that fast? Okay. How do we disclose responsibly when they say stuff like this? They claim that their product is designed to run on a properly secured network. The installer or the network designer is to blame for exploitation of this device. That is from the vendor. I don't know. I mean, how do you deal with that? So, really? So this 6-net device is called a remote terminal unit. It is designed for remote access. Yet, they tell us that the network designers are at fault for this. So if you're supposed to air gap this, how do you get to it? So what other things did I discover? Well, while playing with this, I ported several rootkits to 2.4 Linux, MIPS, got them functional on the 6-net IPM devices. This is a 50 megahertz MIPS box. you're not going to look at this and think PC. It runs Linux. It's no different than any other Linux box on your network. Not at all. I cross-compiled Python for it, so I could run interpreter shells through it and pivot. I found the integrity mangling in the protocol. In addition to this thing speaks Modbus. It speaks all of the SCADA protocols that were involved in Stuxnet. So you could very likely go in and write a protocol mangler. We could change values that are displayed on the reader's board. They would have no idea because there's no integrity to tell you that this has been manipulated. So CVS scoring, what makes these high impact? What makes these vulnerabilities special? So there are 4 categories you have to address. The first one being, how exploitable is it? What is the access vectors? Is it local? Is it remote? How difficult is it? I'll be quite honest with you. I said this from the day that I found it. I found it by accident. I had Wireshark running. I went through the configuration protocol and I saw root commands flying across the screen. I stumbled into it. It fell in my lap. It dumbfounded me how simple the protocol really was. I reverse engineered it, created the Metasploit module, and went from there. So the next category is impact. What is the confidentiality around it? What is the integrity and the availability? So they're discussing, how hard can I own this thing? Can I manipulate the file system? Can I change what you see? Yes. Yes, I can. As far as availability goes, it's, can I DOS the product? Yeah, it's a Linux box. I could write a fork bomb in one line. Environmental. What is the collateral damage and what is the percentage of likely vulnerable devices? As near as I can tell, this protocol goes back almost 10 years. People have been running this on their network for over 10 years, and it has been fully vulnerable the whole time, and the vendor didn't care. Temporal. So if the exploitability occurs, how can it impact the business, right? Are you going to lose money over this? Are you going to drop 4 tons of molten lava in the middle of your work floor? So the score that we came up with when we did the initial testing, we came up with a 10. When they released the CVE, ICS Cert gave it a 10 as well. It's a pretty critical vulnerability. They don't have it patched. They're working on a patch. It's not out yet. So, back to ICS Cert and responsible disclosure. We heard from our contact at 6net. They say your exploit works and they don't want to fix it. They don't plan on doing anything with it. They don't care. They have our money. That's good enough for them. So what do? Do I tell the world? Am I responsible for this disclosure of information, or are the vendors for putting out a product that is vulnerable? You know, I really looked at Weave and the situation that he fell into because it occurred during the timeline of all of this discovery. And it scares the crap out of me that companies can bully us into not doing the right thing, not disclosing. That's scary. I don't want to be a target. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to get vanned over dropping an O-Day. That's ridiculous. We shouldn't be scared as researchers in this field. We just shouldn't. We shouldn't have to go through that. Again, this is a problem I don't know how to fix. If anyone has any ideas about it, please come talk to me. I would love to do something. And if anyone knows what that is, well, carry on. So, the blame game. ICS Cert's doing everything they can. They They've been in this market for a while, and they see this response a lot. Vendors tell them this all the time. They don't want to fix it. They don't care. They have our money already, and that's that. So yes, 99 problems is still a lot of problems. So I'm going to talk about development now. Buildroot.net is a very interesting product. It's an open source tool. It's a cross between CrossTool-ng and root system file generation. You can build development environments for over 12 different architectures with this software. You can create emulatable root file systems. In particular, ARM and MIPS is what you're going to see in a lot of commercial and consumer-grade hardware, especially because of the proliferation of ARM devices into mobile. It's making things more and more readily available at cheaper and cheaper prices. How many people have a Raspberry Pi? Right? Okay, so there you go. $30? I mean, really, what do you want to play with this? It's not expensive to get into this, and the software is all out there. The very interesting part is bootable QEMU images. So this device is 50 megahertz. That one is 150 megahertz ARM. So I can build a QEMU root with the exact same compiler, libraries, and kernel version, and soft boot it off my laptop and run at 500 megahertz instead of 150. It makes research into the vulnerabilities and doing dynamic analysis a lot easier. A whole lot easier than running on 50 megahertz. So what does a common Linux toolchain buy the low-skilled attackers? Well, when you have a toolchain, you can now compile native code. We can build rootkits. We can run QEMU emulation. We now have native GDB and GCC over NFS. You can NFS mount almost all of these devices to a development source and build code out of there. It makes it a lot easier when a device has 2 megs of memory and you mount up your 4 terabyte NFS and go from there. That being said, you can also now generate non-assembler shell codes. So we don't have to stare at hex, we don't have to do crazy stuff, we don't have to pull out IDA Pro and get weird with it. We can do it in C or Perl or Python. The cross-compiled code for Python is very easy. I've got it up on my GitHub. Go look at it. It's 3 lines. 3 lines to cross-compile Python for ARM. From there, you can have a full pivoting Metasploit interpreter shell on ARM. And I didn't compile any code except for Python. You can also get loadable kernel modules now. So now you can start adding more hardware that's not supposed to be on the device to begin with. It also gives you opportunity for stealth rootkits. A lot of the stealth rootkits are loadable kernel based. So more tools is what we essentially get. They're making the vectors easier to exploit because these are all common tools that we all use. These are all stuff that the Linux guys have been jumping up and down for the last couple decades. So non-destructive hardware recon, a quick illustration. So we have JTAG. JTAG is used in a lot of devices to do quality control. So they leave this on there. Well, what can I do with it? Well, I can poke memory. I can read memory. I can dump the flash. I can force breakpoints in the CPU and debug things that are going on that I couldn't normally access. Serial. A lot of times serial are on these devices. The 6-track IPM controller has one. The Polycom has one. How many people have ever played with the WRT54G? So right there you go. Undocumented serials are everywhere. So what does that give us? That gives us the ability to see the boot time messages for debugging. It lets us see into what the device is doing. It may give us some hints about things. It may tell us, oh, this is being checksummed, so I can't mess with that in the firmware. What else can I mess with? What other type of information can you collect out of there? May also give you a console directly into the box. Okay, let's see if we can get this to work. So everybody knows Liam, right? Heck the man. The infamous cherry denial of service. Audio.
Hey DerbyCon, if you're watching this video, it means that my wife is giving birth to our third child, which while I'm sad I'm not down there with you guys, I wouldn't miss the delivery for the world. I hope you guys can understand. So, I'm Liam Randall, and I'm primarily here to represent the blue side, the defensive side of this talk. I have a CS degree and cut my teeth doing large-scale network administration. I've been consulting for the last 10 years, and have spent the last few focusing specifically on IR. I've been consulting for the last 10 years and have spent the past few years focusing specifically on incident response. If you've met me personally, you'll already know that I have a real passion for open source software and found a home on the Bro Core team. This year, especially, Bro became my full-time job, and I'm currently working on product development. I spend a lot of time teaching people about Bro, putting out workshops and training. I'm teaching a half dozen classes still remaining this year. Please check out my blog at liamrandall.com. I got involved in this talk specifically because I have a real interest in advanced red team tactics. The stuff that Kyle does really scares the crap out of me. He's out there developing new and novel approaches to penetration testing. From my point of view, it's harder to defend against things you don't truly understand. So let's pick up right where Kyle left off. By this point, you should start to pick out on what we're trying to communicate today. It's that ICS embedded systems are really soft targets. And while there are dozens of distinct methods of attacking and exploiting these devices, we're just trying to demonstrate a couple. The ultimate message is that all of these things you're already doing on the PC side work with only minor modifications in this space. Your entire arsenal can be deployed. So we've been pretty deliberate about our target selection and exploit vector. We took down a SCADA controller with an ICS protocol bug over TCP/IP. We took down a common key set via serial interface attack, something that requires you to be physically present. For this next one, we're going to do something a little more common, somewhat pedestrian, but a more persistent and prevalent vulnerability: default credentials. So before we move on to the defense side, let's run through just one more example. This time we're going to use default credentials to attack a common brand of PTZ camera. Okay, so on to our target. There are lots of models and manufacturers to choose from. I chose the Sony PTZ because it's a relatively high-end brand with a very large deployment footprint. I spent a little time researching, and I found absolutely no record of the technique that I'm about to demonstrate for you published anywhere. Now, default credentials are certainly not a zero-day. However, I'm going to demonstrate how easy it is to build and upload a Trojan firmware for one of these devices. Okay, so onto the device itself. Let's take a look at this guy. So it's got built-in Ethernet. It can have optional Wi-Fi, a couple expansion slots to add a memory on it. As far as protocols, it speaks the regular TCP/IP suite. It only has 8 megabytes of memory on board because this is one of their older models. It has on the camera side, it's got 25 times optical zoom, multiple frame rates and codecs, and then the camera actually supports any little interface model on the back. So it's kind of a camera ICS controller at once. It has alarm inputs as well as a couple serial interfaces. So these things are commonly set up to do things like buzz open gates or doors or key on pressure sensors or things like that. They're great. There are a lot of new models in this series, but this one's fine. So let's take a walk through how the firmware in this device is updated. So again, what we're starting with today is finding a device that has default credentials. So the first thing you do is simply authenticate to the device. Then, checking the IP, you can use the CGI commands to remotely turn the FTP server on or off. So if I wanted to upload my payload, I would obviously turn that on. I then FTP to the device and create a web home directory and upload whatever I want the device to end up with. I go ahead and push my resources up, and then I make another CGI call, and then boom, I own this camera. So the technique that we're about to demonstrate, I'm just going to upload a payload that I generated using the social engineering toolkit. However, we could easily use the techniques that Kyle just demonstrated to build custom executables for this device or a myriad of other techniques. So what I've done here is I've already logged on to a camera here on a local subnet. 192.168.0.236. This is a PTZ camera, and since the camera itself runs a little slow, I've already uploaded this web directory to the camera. So if we take a look at what I have in the web directory, what I've done is I've copied the existing firmware so the camera will continue to function as far as the Java controls for viewing images and so forth. And then I also created a new subdirectory called set payload, where I've just done a simple a Java-based website attack. So let's go ahead and browse out to the camera itself and take a look at what this thing looks like. Okay, so up in a browser here, I have the Sony PTZ already loaded, and we could log on and browse. Looks like I have a HTML error in the firmware that I've uploaded, but not a big deal. We can still see images off this camera. And we can also browse directly to this camera itself, and you'll see that I'm launching a Java attack against this user. Now, this is a relatively unsophisticated attack. What I could do is actually edit the default HTML files that come with this camera and build something right into the default homepage, which would, I think, be a very sophisticated attack because these cameras do prompt you themselves to run Java utilities and so forth. So if this were a real attack, I would go ahead and launch that, and now I would have connected back to my instance of Kali here, and the system would be pwned. So the greater technique here that I'm attempting to demonstrate is simply that these cameras in these embedded devices are a platform that you can use to pivot throughout the rest of the infrastructure. Okay, so what's the big deal? So we've had 3 demonstrations today so far that kind of go into some more advanced red team tactics. Do these things really matter in the real world? Are these things that you need to be concerned about in your environment? And this is where the story takes a very interesting twist, and why I think that we're going to demonstrate very quickly that this is a real thing to be concerned about. In early 2012, there was a study that was released that was called the Karna Botnet, or the Great Internet Census of 2012. Internally, a team out at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab referred to it as the alien worm. There is a very bright group of individuals out there, and an especially bright individual named Shi Sharma. Works on an incredible team of incident responders. He's a Bro Power user, and he's been involved so far with the discovery of a large number of network anomalies. Some that he's talked about publicly are the 2011 Mordo worm, the 2012 Alien worm that we're about to review, and the 2012 MySQL authentication bypass vulnerability. Ashish runs a very large bro cluster, and he uses it as a network telescope to basically get some insight into trends that are going on network-wide. So if you haven't read about the Karna botnet, the paper they put up is wonderful. I highly suggest you read about it. But let's just read how they describe the worm themselves. So the first thing is access. How were they accessing these embedded devices? And they note that we discovered an amazing number of open embedded devices on the internet. Many of them are based on Linux and allow logon to standard BusyBox with empty or default credentials. The scope was insecure devices are basically located everywhere in the internet. They're not specific to one ISP or country. So the problem of empty or default passwords is an industry-wide phenomenon. In the deployment that they performed, they compromised 25% of the devices they found. Approximately 420,000 unique devices were compromised in this one worm. And then as far as a payload, the binary and the router was written in plain C. It was compiled for 9 different architectures using the OpenWRT build root. Its latest and largest version, this binary was between 46 and 60 kilobytes in size, depending on the target architecture. And then they used these binary to actually scan the internet. They actually tried to scan /0, and you can download all the results if you're interested in seeing what a snapshot of the full internet looked like at the time. They were pretty sophisticated when they conducted their scanning. They tried to go in low and slow. Each device would only scan a couple of IP addresses each and a couple of ports. So let's take a look at the payload itself. So this is a directory listing of a compromised device. Now this is just a sample. We believe that there were multiple revisions, and there would obviously be some minor differences between the 9 unique architecture that they targeted. For the device that this was captured off of, the default password for this family of cameras is either root and blank or root and 123456. The Linux itself reported back as High Linux BusyBox. The total payload is just a little less than 4K with the scanning and the logs there. This file barm_v6k was the daemon that would spin up and run on TCP port 2010. And there were some other indications of this worm when this botnet when it first started operating. If you check just isc.sans.edu, the Internet Storm Center, you can see some evidence of this activity running around the internet. And again, these were a custom payload. Based on the research that Ashish had performed, this sample was taken on June 28th, 2012, and looking back into his network, he saw activity back through May 30th of 2012. So if you notice, there was a README file installed on the payload, and here's what the README actually said. Your router had a very simple or no telnet password at all. We temporarily use it for a nonprofit research project to map the internet. All research results will be made public. We have no intent to damage your device or harm your privacy in any way. So, and then they listed an email address to contact them if you'd like. And if you guys are here, the guys that perform that, I think you'd be pretty easy to pick out. You'd be the guys walking funny because you have balls the size of footballs, considering the number of devices that you guys actually compromised. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the devices themselves. And I think this is where we really start to tie everything together. OpenWRT build root was used via default credentials to build a gigantic botnet to scan the entire internet. Dozens of vulnerable models were actually infected during the course of this botnet. And if you consider where cameras are deployed to begin with, they're already typically in your sensitive areas because it's where you want some kind of physical security. It could be behind your firewall. In the initial research into this botnet, there was a very scary moment when all of the production was traced back to a single Chinese OEM. Now, initially that was very concerning, but I think later, as the worm evolved and stayed relatively benign, people began to realize that it was just a systematic problem in the design of the devices. And these are the super inexpensive home security systems, small business security systems that you see deployed everywhere. You may have one of these at your house now. You buy these at Amazon.com, on Costco, Sam's Club, hundreds of retailers online. And a picture is worth 420,000 devices. It's actually kind of beautiful when you look at it like this. And this graphic here was actually generated by the Karna botnet team. Let's consider here a little ASN analysis. So ASNs are autonomous system numbers. Those are the numbers that are given to the networks that make up the internet itself. So 25% of these infections were on one single network. And that would be this big red area you can see over here in China. They were connected to China Telecom. And if you count the top 5 ASNs that the cameras were connected for, that accounted for approximately 50% of these cameras, or 210,000 devices. And these were primarily Asian ISPs, with the exception of Turk Telecom here. Another hotspot of inexpensive Chinese cameras. But there was a really, really long tail of infection. If you look at the map of the Karna botnet, it generally reflects a map of the United States with a slight Asian, or a map of the global internet with a slight Asian bias here. The top 16 ASNs only accounted for 60% of infections. Ultimately, these inexpensive cameras are available anywhere, everywhere, and they're deployed everywhere. I mean, you can.
Seems we ran short on time. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. If you'd like to see the rest of Liam's research, we'll have the video online. Please come check it out. Come see his blog. Come see mine. Find me on Twitter. Thank you for